you're looking for a terrifying experience, usually you'll want to target horror games in which the protagonist is all alone, exploring a ghost town or creepy mansion. With that being said, there's plenty of great horror games that focus on deep storytelling and relationships that usually feature a duo of characters facing the horrors together. In fact, it's in these horror games where we see some of the best duos come together and overcome insane odds by just working really well together and helping each other achieve the impossible. So yeah, on today's episode of Nerdspace Games, we're recognizing those duos, as I'll be giving you guys my top 10 favorite duos in horror games. For this video, we won't be including any villain or monster duos, that'll be for a different video. Also, to keep things interesting, I'm only including one duo per franchise. Oh, and I won't be featuring any human and animal type of duos on this list either, so yeah, unfortunately, no Huey and Fiona or Brown and Jennifer. Finally, this is just my personal opinion, and each of these duos connected with me the most in their respective games, whether that's because of their relationship or how badass they are together. However, I'd love to hear your favorite duo in a horror game in the comments down below. Before we get started though, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel for more survival horror content. Also hit that like button if you enjoyed today's topic. Anyway, my name is Ruben with Nerdspace Games, and this is the top 10 best duos in horror games. Let's get it. Number 10, Regina and Dylan, Dino Crisis 2. One of my favorite protagonists in a horror game is Regina from Dino Crisis. She's an absolute badass in the way that she takes out dinosaurs like they're nothing. However, her partner in Dino Crisis 2, Dylan, is just as cool as she is. The two find themselves transported into the time of dinosaurs, and while there, they are encountered by different dinosaurs together. From raptors to T-Rexes, these two defy all odds together to bring down all sorts of dinosaurs, and they do so in large amounts. Unlike the first game, the dinosaurs in this game feel endless, and there's always so many of them attacking the player at once. Regina and Dylan might not be the most complex duo on today's list, but they are easily one of my favorites and one of the most badass duos in a horror game. Number 9, Clark and Carver, Dead Space 3. Dead Space 3 is regarded as the worst game of the trilogy, mostly because of the lack of horror in this entry compared to its predecessors, and the fact that it features microtransactions. However, if there's one positive that came out of this game, it was John Carver, Isaac Clarke's partner throughout the events of Dead Space 3. See, like with many other horror franchises at the time, Dead Space took the series in a different direction to cash in on the action third-person co-op shooter genre. Fear 3, Resident Evil 6, all of these games were doing it as well, and Dead Space 3 was just another victim of this trend. Still, John Carver was actually a pretty interesting character on his own though. He would have his own unique things to do in missions, his own trauma and backstory to deal with, and have a vital part in the story compared to other horror games in which the second player usually just portrays a faceless, unimportant character in the plot. And what Carver and Clark achieved together, no spoilers of course, is something that's worth experiencing at least once with a friend. I highly recommend playing Dead Space 3 at some point, not alone, but with one of your friends, as it's actually a pretty fun co-op shooter with a friend. Sure, it may be a massive disappointment in comparison to previous entries of the series, but it's still not a bad game, and the best parts of the game feature the relationship between Carver and Clark throughout most of the story. Number 8, Alan and Saga, Alan Wake 2. Alan Wake and Saga Anderson have a pretty unique relationship compared to a lot of the duos on today's list. See, Alan Wake is a writer that has found himself in the Dark Place after sacrificing himself to save his wife and Bright Falls in the previous game. However, while in the Dark Place, Alan looks for a way out of the Dark Place as he writes Saga Anderson into his story, an FBI agent who is connected to Bright Falls in different ways that she's unaware of at first. The two must work together across different worlds to defeat the Dark Forces, the Tekken, cults, and other dangerous enemies in order to save what's important to each of them. For Saga, it's her family. For Alan, it's his wife. Watching them connect in between chapters and somehow finding ways to communicate with each other despite being in different worlds is one of the best parts of the game, and it leads to one of the best final acts in a horror game. I'm extremely excited for the future when it comes to these two characters, and I can't wait to see both of them explored in future games, especially after some of the reveals that we see in Alan Wake 2. Number 7, Pointman and Fatale, Fear 3. While it's far less horror and way more action compared to its predecessor, Fear 3 brings everything together in one final conclusion to everybody's stories. As I said with Dead Space 3 earlier, Fear 3 also went in a similar direction as it wanted to cash in on the co-op action shooter trend despite it being a horror franchise. Unlike Dead Space 3 though, Fear 3 didn't introduce a brand new character as the second protagonist, but rather a returning character, Paxton Fatale. I won't dive into spoilers for Fear 3 too much, but note that I will be spoiling things that occurred in the previous games, but most notably the first Fear game. In that game, Deployment was the main protagonist and one of the antagonists of the game was Fattel. However, near the end of that game, it's revealed that they are both brothers and that they are the sons of Amma Wade. I won't dive too much into what happened, but just know that these two were against each other for most of the first game. However, in the third game, they actually team up as unlikely allies, creating a unique duo that is unlike any other duo out there in a horror game. Sure, they may not trust each other, but given their circumstances, they must work together throughout the game. Deployment has his typical abilities that he had in the first game, and Fattel, controlled by the other character, has abilities like telekinesis to use to his advantage. Together, they are an unstoppable force, even if they don't agree with each other, nor do they agree with how to approach different situations. Without revealing the ending of the game, there's actually two different ways that this game could end, and it's completely dependent on who you are controlling on single player, or if you're playing on co-op, it's dependent on who has the highest score. Yeah, it's a fun and unique duo that definitely may not share the same teamwork trait as other duos on today's list, but its unique dynamic is why it claims the spot on today's list of best duos. Number 6, Mio and Mayu, Fatal Frame 2, Crimson Butterfly. The theme of Fatal Frame 2, Crimson Butterfly centers around twins and the deep connection they share with each other. At the start of the game, we're introduced to Mio and Mayu, twin sisters that find themselves lost before arriving at Minakami Village, aka the Lost Village. Upon arriving in this haunted village, ghosts begin to appear, and it ultimately leads to the two being separated. Mio, the main protagonist of the game, spends a majority of the game looking for and reuniting with Mayu so that they can escape the village together, and their relationship and connection is put to the test as other spirits of twins sacrificed in this village haunt them and attempt to manipulate them into becoming the next sacrifice. It's a heartwarming story that leaves you completely speechless from start to finish with each reveal, and Mio and Mayu's relationship is front and center through it all. Number 5, Sebastian and Kidman, The Evil Within. While they aren't the best of partners in the first game, considering that Kidman betrayed Sebastian and was working for Mobius at the time, the second game had them pair up for a majority of the game, as Kidman was constantly in communication with Sebastian the entire time he was inside of STEM. The two would constantly talk things out and work out solutions together, despite Kidman not being there physically to assist Sebastian most of the time. Of course, Kidman did eventually get her hands dirty near the end of the game, but a majority of her work alongside Sebastian was more of a voice in the chair, like Alfred is to Batman or Ned is to Peter Parker. Throughout this time, we see their relationship grow as partners, and we even get to see Sebastian constantly vent and reminisce to Kidman from time to time about his past. If it wasn't for Kidman, I feel like Sebastian would have gone insane inside of STEM this time around, but since he always had Kidman looking out for him on the outside, he was never truly alone. There's more than that, of course, but to avoid spoilers, I'll just say this. I know Sebastian is married, but gotta say, I've always shipped the hell out of Kidman and Sebastian. Number 4, Mono and Six, Little Nightmares 2. Little Nightmares 2 is a prequel to the first game in which we follow Six and a new protagonist, Mono, as they battle the dark and sinister adults in this apocalyptic-like world. We play as Mono, a young boy who is trying to survive this horrifying world, who then eventually finds and rescues Six, the protagonist of the first game, like I said. Throughout the game, Mono leads Six through many horrible things, but he always somehow finds a way to get him and Six to safety despite the overwhelming odds stacked against him. Six, on the other hand, begins to learn from Mono and begins to understand how to survive and finds ways to ensure her own survival throughout the game. The two appear inseparable, and together they take down many of the different nightmarish-like enemies in the game. Even when Six is captured, Mono immediately rushes after Six without hesitation to rescue her because of how deep their relationship is. Obviously, I won't hit on any spoilers here, but let's just say that their relationship and teamwork throughout Little Nightmares 2 is easily one of the best parts of the game, even when things get dark. And I promise you, this is a duo that'll leave you completely speechless by the end of the game. End of story. They are without a doubt one of the most memorable duos in all of horror games, hence why they crack my list for best duos in horror games. Number 3, Lee and Clementine, The Walking Dead Telltale series. The top 3 on this list really could go either way, as I personally went back and forth between all 3 couples. Ultimately though, I settled for putting Lee and Clementine from The Walking Dead series as number 3 on today's list. Despite only appearing in a single season together, the relationship of Lee and Clementine was so powerful that it'll leave such a major mark on you as a person. Seriously, there's not many duos in horror games that have such a big impact on me, and narrative speaking, they might very well be the best duo on this list in that regard. Their story together begins with Lee finding Clementine in a treehouse alone and trying to survive in a world now full of zombies. From this point on, Lee takes it upon himself to raise Clementine himself, and thus begins their journey together. Because the game allows you to control the narrative, Lee and Clementine's relationship can be a little different depending on which path you take at the crossroads. However, one thing is certain by the end of the first season, Lee and Clementine's relationship is extremely powerful. He became a father to her when she she needed it most, and he taught her everything she needed to know to survive this world. Their connection is stronger than most duos on today's list, and hell, maybe more than all the duos on today's list, and for that reason they are definitely deserving of the title as one of the best duos in horror games, period. Number 2, Chris and Jill, Resident Evil. In terms of the amount of games and years we've spent in real life watching this duo work together, I don't think anybody comes close to matching them. Chris and Jill have been partners since the first RE game back in 1996, in which they both found themselves trapped inside of a living nightmare. From surviving the Spencer Mansion incident together to bringing down Umbrella to even fighting each other, Chris and Jill have literally been through hell together. Yet through it all, they remain partners in their war against BOWs. At one point, Jill even attempted to sacrifice herself to save Chris in the Lost in Nightmares DLC. In Revelations, both Jill and Chris actually rushed to each other's aid when they both thought that the other was in trouble. And even when Jill was corrupted by Wesker via a brainwashing device, Chris still fought to get Jill back and gave his all to make sure that his partner was back to her old self again. No matter which way you look at it, this is a duo that has been together through all sorts of problems, and despite that, they always end up on top. Actually, one thing I would love in the future is a Resident Evil game where we have both Chris and Jill working together from start to finish, because believe it or not, we haven't really got that yet. RE1, they were separated all game. Revelations, they didn't team up until halfway through the story, and RE5, they were actually against each other for most of the story. Yeah, so seriously, come on Capcom, let's make it happen. Number 1, Joel and Ellie, The Last of Us. Yeah, I can't really argue against anybody that wants to pick Chris and Jill or Lee and Clementine as their number 1 pick, but for me, it goes to Joel and Ellie, and it's mainly because of one thing: chemistry. While there has been surrogate father and daughter duos in horror games before, like Harry and Heather, or even Lee and Clementine, which we already covered on this list earlier, Joel and Ellie just stand out as being more deep, emotional, and impactful in comparison to all of them. Seriously, the road that these two go on in the first Last of Us game is just unbelievable. From watching Joel lose his daughter in the opening of the game, to meeting Ellie and being annoyed with her at first, to then sacrificing literally the entire world to keep her safe, is just mind-blowing and heartwarming. We see their relationship and connection build throughout the story, from their witty comebacks to each other to even their frustration with each other at times, before the two become family and eventually see each other as father and daughter, sort of. This even resonates over into the second game, in which we see Ellie go across the country in Joel's name because of how important he was to her. The Last of Us is one of my favorite games to replay, and it's mainly due to their story and their chemistry from start to finish, as it's refreshing, emotional, and impactful from the moment they meet to the final scene of the game. After saying that about a duo, how could I not give them the title of best duo in a horror game? Well, that does it for this episode of Nerdspace Games. Hit up the comments and let me know what you think of my list. Is Joel and Ellie the best duo in a horror game, or is there a different duo deserving of that title? Let me know down below. Anyway, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to my channel for more survival horror and Resident Evil content. Also, leave a like on today's video if you enjoyed today's topic. But thanks for watching, and as always, I'll catch you guys on the next episode of Nerdspace Games. Take care.